May 1947. A frail old man steps out of a car on a lonely California hilltop for the last time. This is William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper king who bent presidents to his will and threw parties that made Hollywood kneel. Behind him stands his castle, 240 rooms of marble and gold, pools fit for emperors, towers reaching toward the Pacific sky. For 3 decades, this was America's wildest playground. Movie stars swam past zebras. Politicians made deals under Renaissance ceilings. Champagne flowed while the country burned through the Depression. But tonight, the music has stopped forever. The man who built it all is nearly bankrupt. The castle that screamed power has become a prison he can barely afford to keep. And buried in these marble halls is a secret that explains everything. Some dreams don't fulfill you, they devour you alive. This is the story of obsession, yellow journalism, and the terrible price of chasing a fantasy too far. Because William Randolph Hearst didn't just build a mansion. He built a monument to American excess that would ultimately consume everything he loved. The obsession started in childhood, as the darkest obsessions always do. Born in 1863 to a rough mining millionaire and a cultured mother desperate for respectability, young Willie Hearst grew up surrounded by wealth but starved for warmth. His father George understood ore veins and mining claims. His mother Phoebe understood only one thing: her family would never be accepted by San Francisco's old money unless she erased every trace of their dirty mining fortune. She filled their mansion with rules. French tutors. Classical music. Art books from Europe. The house felt like hers, not his. Willie learned early, he was always being measured. Never refined enough. Never quite good enough. Then came 1873. Phoebe took 10-year-old Willie on an 18-month European tour. While she studied art with scholarly seriousness, Willie absorbed something different. He saw power made visible in stone. European nobility lived in castles filled with treasures collected over centuries. Walking through those halls meant walking through proof that your family mattered enough to build something that would outlast you. The boy who felt small in his mother's mansion began dreaming of a palace he could one day call his own. Harvard expelled him for sending chamber pots engraved with professors' names to the faculty. But Willie convinced his father to let him run the failing San Francisco Examiner. He was 23, wealthy, reckless, and hungry to prove himself. Newspapers, he discovered, were perfect for a boy who grew up feeling powerless. Newspapers let you tell people what to think. They let you attack enemies in print where they couldn't fight back. And if you ran them right, newspapers made enough money to buy castles. Hearst studied Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and drew a brutal lesson: facts are dull, but stories sell. He hired the best writers, bought better presses, and ordered headlines so large they could be read from across the street. Crime stories received bigger play than their importance justified. Political corruption, real or exaggerated, exploded across front pages. If a story wasn't dramatic enough, Hearst's editor sharpened it. A fire became catastrophe. A disagreement turned into blood feud. It worked. Circulation climbed. In 1895, Hearst bought the New York Morning Journal and brought his formula east for war. His battle with Pulitzer remade American media. He cut prices to 1 penny per copy, selling at a loss just to steal readers. He introduced color printing and comic strips. His papers screamed louder, printed bigger pictures, told wilder stories. Journalists called it yellow journalism, sensational stories built on half-truths and shameless exaggeration. Hearst wore the label proudly. Then came Cuba, and Hearst discovered the most dangerous lesson of his life. By 1896, Cuba was fighting Spain for independence. Hearst saw opportunity and seized it. His papers ran daily stories about Spanish atrocities, some real, many exaggerated, a few entirely invented. When the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor in February 1898, killing 260 American sailors, Hearst's journal blamed Spain before any investigation began. The headlines screamed accusations. Drawings showed Spanish saboteurs planting underwater mines. Editorials demanded war. Historians still debate what actually sank the Maine. Modern analysis suggests an accidental coal fire ignited ammunition. But in 1898, what mattered wasn't truth, it was the story Hearst told so loudly that millions accepted it without question. America went to war. Hearst's circulation soared. And William Randolph Hearst learned that if you control the story, you control reality. If you shout loud enough, facts bend until they look like whatever you say they are. By 1900, he owned newspapers in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and Los Angeles. His empire was growing. His fortune was secure. Now he needed a castle worthy of a king. Most wealthy men in 1919 would have hired a prestigious New York firm. Hearst made a different choice. He hired Julia Morgan, a 47-year-old architect working quietly from a San Francisco office. She was the first woman admitted to the architecture program at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. She was small, soft-spoken, and absolutely precise. Where Hearst was expansive and impulsive, Morgan was methodical and grounded. Where he dreamed in grand gestures, she thought in load-bearing walls and earthquake forces. After his mother's death in 1919, Hearst inherited the family ranch, 40,000 acres along the California coast near San Simeon. He brought Morgan to the hilltop overlooking the Pacific and said, "I'm getting a little old for camping in tents. I'd like to build a little something." Morgan understood immediately that Hearst was describing nothing little. What she couldn't have known was that this little something would consume the next 28 years of her life. They began with sketches. Hearst wanted a main house, La Casa Grande, and 3 guest cottages. He wanted Mediterranean style reminiscent of Spanish missions but grander, richer, more elaborate. Towers. Terraces. Pools. Morgan listened, took notes, walked the site. Then she returned to San Francisco and began drawing. Construction started in 1919. Neither of them knew it would never truly finish. The project grew in layers, constantly shifting as Hearst's tastes evolved. He toured Europe regularly, buying entire rooms from demolished palaces, Spanish ceilings, Italian doorways, French fireplaces, Gothic choir stalls. He shipped them to California in crates and told Morgan to build around them. If a ceiling didn't fit the room she designed, she redesigned the room. Hearst treated the whole project like the world's most expensive toy, adding pieces wherever they looked interesting. Morgan somehow wove his contradictory impulses into something cohesive. La Casa Grande rose 4 stories with twin bell towers. Inside, rooms flowed without obvious logic. A Gothic library opened onto a Spanish cloister. A Moorish sitting room led to a Renaissance bedroom. The assembly room stretched 100 feet, lined with Italian choir stalls and hung with Flemish tapestries, less like a living room than a throne hall. Then came the pools, and here the madness truly showed. The outdoor Neptune pool began as a simple rectangular design. Hearst rejected it. Too plain. Morgan tried again with classical columns. Better, but not grand enough. The Neptune pool went through multiple complete reconstructions over 17 years before reaching its final form, 104 feet of Vermont marble surrounding turquoise water, framed by a Roman temple facade and flanked by marble statues. The indoor Roman pool took inspiration from ancient baths Hearst had seen in Italy. Morgan covered every surface in hand-set glass mosaic tiles, blue, gold, and orange. 8 marble statues lined the walls. Light filtered through alabaster lamps, making the water glow from within. The zoo grew alongside the architecture. Hearst imported animals from around the world: zebras, emus, kangaroos, elk, buffalo, even polar bears. They roamed semi-free across the hillside. Guests driving up the winding road passed zebras grazing near oak trees, as if this combination of African wildlife and California ranchland were the most natural thing in the world. Every year brought new additions. A tennis court. Another library. More guest rooms. The project had no end date because Hearst had no intention of stopping. Building was the point. Acquiring was the point. By 1925, San Simeon was famous, and invitations to spend a weekend on the hill became the most coveted ticket in California. But the castle needed a queen, and Hearst found her in 1915. Marion Davies was a chorus girl in a Broadway show when they met. She was 18. He was 52, married with 5 sons, and already one of the most powerful men in America. She was funny, warm, quick on her feet, and utterly charming. He fell hard. Within a year, he was financing her movie career, using his newspapers to promote her films, trying to will her into stardom through raw money and publicity. She did have real talent, sharp comic timing, a natural screen presence. But the whispers followed her everywhere. Marion Davies was only famous because William Randolph Hearst said so. Hearst poured millions into her career. He founded Cosmopolitan Pictures specifically to produce her films. He pressured theater owners to show them. Millicent Hearst, the legal Mrs. Hearst, stayed in New York with their 5 sons, living separately but never agreeing to a divorce. Marion would never wear a wedding ring. She would always be Miss Davies, the actress living with a married man. San Simeon became her refuge and her cage. At the castle, Marion was the unofficial hostess. She greeted guests, kept conversation moving, remembered everyone's names, and made Hollywood's biggest egos feel relaxed at Hearst's stiff, rule-bound table. She was genuinely kind. When actors struggled with alcohol, she tried to steady them quietly. When Hearst's moods turned dark and controlling, she cut through the tension with jokes and emotional warmth no amount of money could buy. The routine almost never changed. Friday afternoon, a private train car pulled out of Los Angeles carrying 15 to 30 invited guests. By early evening, they reached San Luis Obispo, where Hearst's limousines waited to begin the slow 5-mile climb. Through the windows, guests watched zebras and buffalo grazing in golden light. Then the road curved one final time, and the castle appeared, white towers glowing against the darkening sky, floodlights washing over pools and terraces. Charlie Chaplin came regularly. So did Clark Gable, Greta Garbo, Cary Grant, Carole Lombard, and Joan Crawford. Nearly every major star of Hollywood's golden age spent a weekend at San Simeon, along with directors, producers, writers, politicians, and business tycoons. The guest list was invitation-only and gloriously unpredictable. A silent film comedian might find himself seated next to a Supreme Court justice. Guests were assigned rooms furnished with Renaissance furniture and museum-quality art. They dressed formally for dinner, cocktails at 7:30, dinner at 9 o'clock, served at a long refectory table that could seat 40. Hearst took the center spot, Marion beside him. The food was surprisingly plain. For all the opulence, Hearst preferred straightforward dishes, roast chicken, simple vegetables. Ketchup and mustard bottles sat openly on the table next to fine china and crystal. Conversation was lively but bounded by invisible lines. No business deals. No political arguments. And absolutely no criticism of Hearst or his newspapers. After dinner came movie screenings in Hearst's private theater, then dancing, billiards, or walks through moonlit gardens. All of it stopped at midnight when Hearst's bedtime rule kicked in. Lights out. The atmosphere felt easygoing, but there was always an unspoken bargain. You were here because Hearst allowed it, and in exchange, you didn't cross him. Most guests adored the arrangement. But a few found it unsettling. They noticed how closely Hearst watched everything. They understood how his newspapers could elevate or ruin careers with a handful of headlines. The castle was a demonstration of power dressed up as a weekend getaway. Hearst wasn't satisfied with running Hollywood's favorite escape. What he really wanted was political power to match his media empire. By the mid-1920s, his newspaper empire was enormous. He owned 28 newspapers in 18 cities, plus magazines, newsreel companies, and film studios. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans read a Hearst publication every day. He used that power aggressively. His papers championed causes he believed in, sometimes progressive, sometimes conservative, often contradictory. The only constant was Hearst himself. He ran for mayor of New York in 1905 and lost. He ran for governor in 1906 and lost again. Between races, he poured money into candidates, then turned his newspapers on them with shocking ferocity when they disappointed him. Presidents courted his endorsement. Senators feared his attacks. San Simeon became more than a party palace, it became a political stage. Senators slipped up to the hilltop for quiet weekends where bills could be discussed far from cameras. Presidential hopefuls made pilgrimages, knowing that favorable coverage in Hearst papers could nudge an election. The line between journalism and political manipulation vanished. When Hearst opposed a policy, his papers framed it as catastrophe. When he supported a candidate, that candidate enjoyed glowing profiles while opponents were dragged through scandals and rumors. Facts became flexible tools arranged to serve Hearst's chosen narrative. Hollywood guests watched with mixed emotions, but everyone understood that crossing Hearst carried consequences. Marion saw the darker reality. She watched senators and governors flatter Hearst to his face, then roll their eyes when he left. She saw studio executives laughing at his jokes, then complaining about his interference once back in Los Angeles. She understood that many guests didn't come because they loved Hearst, they came because they feared him or needed him. And she watched Hearst grow more isolated even as he surrounded himself with crowds. While movie stars sipped cocktails by the Neptune pool, another population kept San Simeon alive, the staff. At its peak, San Simeon employed more than 150 people full-time: maids, cooks, gardeners, electricians, plumbers, drivers, animal keepers. A workforce large enough to run a hotel and ranch simultaneously, working around the clock to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury. They lived in dormitories far from the main house, worked long hours for decent but not generous wages, and followed strict rules. Staff were expected to be invisible. The castle was staged to feel like a place that maintained itself by magic. The first cracks appeared in 1929. The stock market crashed. Banks failed. The Depression settled over America. Newspapers lost advertising. Circulation dropped. Revenue slowed to a trickle. Hearst kept spending. He bought more art. He added more rooms. He financed more of Marion's films. He behaved as if money were an endless river, as if his empire was too big to sink. His accountants told him otherwise. His sons begged him to cut costs. His business managers brought reports showing the gap between income and expenses widening every month. Hearst ignored them all. He built his empire by thinking big and spending boldly. Cutting back felt like surrender. By 1935, Hearst owed roughly $125 million, the equivalent of around $2 billion in modern terms. His assets were enormous but mostly illiquid. He couldn't turn them into cash fast enough to keep up with debts. Eventually, the bank stepped in. In 1937, creditors took control of Hearst's finances. They installed their own managers and placed strict limits on spending. They began selling assets. Newspapers were shut down or sold off. Real estate was liquidated. And most painfully, they started selling his art, the treasures he'd spent 4 decades collecting. Gimbel's department store in New York held a public sale of Hearst's collection. Thousands of items were displayed across multiple floors. The newspapers covered the sale as a spectacle of humiliation. The man who'd spent his life acquiring objects to prove he would never lose anything was now selling them off one by one. Construction at San Simeon stopped completely. Workers were dismissed. Plans for new wings were abandoned. The castle that had grown continuously for 18 years suddenly froze. Under the weight of all this, Hearst seemed to age overnight. He was 74. His health was declining. His life's work was being dismantled by bankers. The man who'd once bent public opinion with a headline now had to ask permission to spend his own money. Marion watched with growing helplessness. The restless energy that had driven him for decades dwindled. He became short-tempered, withdrawn, fixated on small details because he could no longer control the larger forces tearing his empire apart. The parties at San Simeon became less frequent, then rare, then stopped altogether. The castle fell quiet. Staff levels dropped to a skeleton crew. Whole sections were closed off. Rooms that had echoed with laughter stood dark and locked. By 1947, doctors told Hearst he could no longer live at San Simeon. The castle was too remote for emergency care. He needed to be closer to Los Angeles, closer to hospitals. In May 1947, William Randolph Hearst left San Simeon for the last time. He moved into a rented house in Beverly Hills, smaller, plainer, a comfortable mansion where an old man could fade away without fuss. Marion stayed with him. She didn't have to. By then she was wealthy in her own right. But she stayed because after 36 years together, walking away felt like tearing out a piece of her own life. Hearst died on August 14, 1951, at age 88. Marion was at his bedside. His wife Millicent flew in from New York for the funeral. His 5 sons came. Hollywood sent flowers. Marion was not invited to the funeral. The Hearst family made that clear. She'd been his partner for more than 3 decades, but she'd never been his wife. In the official mourning, she didn't exist. 36 years vanished with one unspoken decision. After his death, the Hearst family faced an immediate problem. The castle was enormously expensive to maintain, and they had no practical use for a 240-room palace on a remote hilltop. In 1957, the Hearst Corporation donated San Simeon to the state of California. The condition was simple: it had to become a state historical monument, preserved and opened for tours. The first public tours began in June 1958. Visitors rode up the same winding road that had once carried Hollywood's elite, but now they arrived in buses instead of limousines. They paid $2 for admission and followed guides through rooms that still smelled of old money and faded ambition. The guides told a polished version of the story. They introduced Hearst as a newspaper publisher and art collector but didn't mention how many papers he'd closed or how much debt he'd piled up. Marion Davies was barely mentioned, a passing detail, an actress who sometimes visited. Nothing about her 3 decades as hostess, her quiet help for struggling actors, her loyalty to a man who could never make her his wife. History was being edited in real time. Julia Morgan worked on San Simeon for 28 years. She made more than 800 trips from San Francisco to the remote hilltop. She supervised construction crews, solved engineering problems created by Hearst's chaotic imagination, and turned his constantly shifting ideas into buildings that actually stood and survived. She was a genius. Her technical skill was extraordinary. Hearst demanded the impossible. Julia Morgan made the impossible real. She did this while fighting battles Hearst never thought about. As a woman in a male-dominated profession, she faced constant skepticism. She proved doubters wrong again and again, but the proving never stopped. When Hearst's finances collapsed and construction stopped, Morgan was simply dismissed. No grand farewell, no recognition of nearly 3 decades of brilliance. When California opened San Simeon for tours, her name was barely spoken. Guides told visitors Hearst built when they meant Morgan designed and Hearst paid for. The architectural achievement was credited to the client instead of the architect. Morgan never complained publicly, but the injustice was real. The castle people admired was as much hers as his. Marion Davies suffered a different erasure. After Hearst's death, she used her own considerable fortune for tangible good. She funded children's hospitals. She supported clinics treating polio. She quietly sent money to struggling actors she remembered from her film days. While Hearst spent decades projecting power, she spent her later years quietly writing checks that actually changed lives. Marion died in 1961, 10 years after Hearst, wealthy, comfortable, and largely forgotten. History is slowly correcting this. Modern tours mention Morgan by name. Biographies treat Marion more sympathetically. Scholars now recognize that San Simeon is as much a monument to these 2 women as it is to Hearst himself. But for decades, the story was told as if William Randolph Hearst single-handedly willed it into existence. He didn't. He never could have. The castle stands because 2 extraordinary women made it stand. The sun rises over San Simeon much the same way it did 100 years ago. Golden light touches the white towers first, then spills over terraces and pools. The Pacific stretches endlessly beyond. Tour groups arrive from everywhere, families on vacation, architecture students, history obsessives, curious travelers. They walk through rooms where Charlie Chaplin laughed and senators made deals. Most leave impressed by the beauty and scale. Some leave unsettled by the excess. A few leave thinking seriously about what the story actually says. William Randolph Hearst wanted to be remembered. He wanted a monument that would outlast his body and prove his importance. In that narrow sense, he succeeded. The castle stands. His name is still on the signs. Hundreds of thousands visit every year. But what they remember is not what he intended. They remember the excess. They remember the loneliness implied by empty halls built for crowds that no longer come. They remember the cautionary tale, a story about dreams that grow too large and appetites that never learn to stop. Many think of Citizen Kane before they think of Hearst himself. Yet there's something almost hopeful in what San Simeon has become. The palace that once pushed ordinary people away now invites them in. The estate built to showcase one man's superiority now treats everyone the same. School children walk through rooms designed for millionaires. Tourists from modest backgrounds stand under ceilings bought from European palaces. The monument to inequality turned slowly into a small victory for public access. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the building itself, but what happened to it after the builder lost control. Not the parties, but what came after the music stopped. Not Hearst's original dream, but what the rest of us chose to do with the ruins once he could no longer direct the script. Hearst chose accumulation. He chose power. He chose himself. And he ended his life in a rented house far from the castle that was supposed to prove his greatness. The castle remains on the hill, beautiful, unnecessary, honest in ways its builder never intended. The ocean continues beyond it, vast and patient, outlasting headlines, empires, and egos alike. San Simeon stands as proof that how we treat people while building our legacy matters far more than the legacy itself.